Hey, folks. Since the next part of our story has Paul Edgecombe taking a trip outside of the prison, I figured I'd come outside to read the next couple of chapters of The Green Mile. So, without further ado, The Green Mile, Part 3, Coffey's Hands, Chapter 4. Before leaving that night, I arranged with Brutal to cover me the next day, should I come in a little late. When I got up the following morning, I set out for Tefton, down in Topeka County. I'm not sure I like you worrying so much about this fellow Coffey, my wife said, handing me the lunch she put up for me. Janice never believed in roadside hamburger stands. She used to say there was a bellyache waiting in every one. It's not like you, Paul. I'm not worried about him, I said. I'm curious, that's all. In my experience, one leads to the other, Janice said tartly, then gave me a good hearty kiss on the mouth. You look better, at least, I'll say that. For a while there, you had me nervous. Waterworks all cured up? All cured up, I said, and off I went, singing songs like Come Josephine and My Flying Machine, and rearing the money to keep myself company. I went to the offices of the Tefton Intelligencer first, and they told me that Burt Hammersmith, the fellow I was looking for, was most likely over at the county courthouse. At the courthouse, they told me that Hammersmith had been there, but had left when a bust water pipe had closed down the main proceedings, which happened to be a rape trial. In the pages of the Intelligencer, the crime would be referred to as assault on a woman, which was how such things were done in the days before Ricky Lake and Carney Wilson came on the scene. They guess he'd probably gone on home. I got some directions out of dirt roads so rutted and narrow I just about didn't dare take my Ford up it. And there I found my man. Hammersmith had written most of the stories on the Coffey trial, and it was from him I found out most of the details about the brief manhunt that had netted Coffey in the first place. The details in the Intelligencer, considered too gruesome to print, is what I mean, of course. Mrs. Hammersmith was a young woman with a tired, pretty face and hands red from lye soap. She didn't ask my business, just led me through a small house fragrant with the smell of baking and onto the back porch, where her husband sat with a bottle of pop in his hand and an unopened copy of Liberty magazine on his lap. There was a small, sloping backyard at the foot of it. Two little ones were squabbling and laughing over a swing. From the porch, it was impossible to tell their sexes, but I thought they were boy and girl. Maybe even twins, which cast an interesting sort of light on their father's part, peripheral as it had been in the Coffey trial. Nearer at hand, set like an island in the middle of a turd-studded patch of bare, beat-up-looking ground, was a doghouse. No sign of Fido. It was another unseasonably hot day, and I guess he was probably inside snoozing. Burt, you all got a company, Mrs. Hammersmith said. All right, he said. He glanced at me, glanced at his wife, then back at his kids, which is where his heart obviously lay. He was a thin man, almost painfully thin, as if he had just begun to recover from a serious illness, and his hair had started to recede. His wife touched his shoulder tentatively with one of her red, watchworn hands. He didn't look at it or reach up to touch it, and after a moment, she took it back. It occurred to me, fleetingly, that they looked more like brother and sister than husband and wife. He'd gotten the brains, she'd gotten the looks, but neither of them had escaped some underlying resemblance, a heredity that could never be escaped. Later, going home, I realized they didn't look alike at all. What made them seem to was the aftermath of stress and the lingering of sorrow. It's strange how pain marks our faces and makes us look like family. She said, You all want a cold drink, Mr. It's Edgecombe, I said. Paul Edgecombe. And thank you. A cold drink would be wonderful, ma'am. She went back inside. I held out my hand to Hammersmith, who gave it a brief shake. His grip was limp and cold. He never took his eyes off the kids down at the bottom of the yard. Mr. Hammersmith, I'm E-Block Superintendent at Cold Mountain State Prison. I know what it is, he said, looking at me with a little more interest. So, the bull goose screw of the Dream Mile is standing on my back porch, just as big as life. What brings you 50 miles to talk to the local rag's only full-time reporter? John Coffey, I said. I thought I expected some sort of strong reaction. The kids who could have been twins working at the back of my mind, and perhaps the doghouse too. The Dedricks had a dog. But Hammersmith only raised his eyebrows and sipped at his drink. Coffey's your problem now, isn't he? Hammersmith asked. He's not much of a problem, I said. He doesn't like the dark, and he cries a lot of the time, but neither thing makes much of a problem in our line of work. We see worse. Cries a lot, does he? Hammersmith asked. Well, he's got a lot to cry about, I'd say. Considering what he did. What do you want to know? Anything you can tell me. I've read your newspaper stories, so I guess what I want is anything that wasn't in them. He gave me a sharp, dry look. Like how the little girls looked? Like exactly what he did to them? That the kind of stuff you're interested in, Mr. Edgecombe? No, I said, keeping my voice mild. It's not the Dederick girls I'm interested in, sir. Poor little mites are dead. But Coffey's not. Not yet. And I'm curious about it. All right, he said. Pull up a chair and sit, Mr. Edgecombe. You'll forgive me if I sounded a little sharp just now, but I get to see plenty of vultures in my line of work. Hell, I've been accused of being one of them often enough myself. I just wanted to make sure of you. And are you? Sure enough, I guess, he said, sounding almost indifferent. The story he told me is pretty much the one I set down earlier in this account. How Mrs. Dederick found the porch empty, the screen door pulled off its upper hinge, the blankets cast into one corner, and blood on the steps. How her son and husband had taken after the girl's abductor. How the posse had caught up to them first, and to John Coffey much later. How Coffey had been sitting on the riverbank and wailing, with the bodies curled in his massive arms like big dolls. The reporter, racked thin in his open-collared white shirt and gray town pants, spoke in a low, unemotional voice. But his eyes never left his own two children as they squabbled and laughed and took turns with the swing down there in the shade at the foot of the slope. Sometime in the middle of the story, Mrs. Hammersmith came back with a bottle of homemade root beer, cold and strong and delicious. She stood listening for a while, then interrupted long enough to call down to the kids and tell them to come up directly. She had cookies due out the oven. We will, Mama, called the little girl's voice, and the woman went back inside again. When Hammersmith had finished, he said, So why do you want to know? I never had me a visit from a big house screw before. It's a first. I told you. Curiosity, yep. Folks get curious, I know it. I even thank God for it. I'd be out of a job and might actually have to go to work for a living without it. But 50 miles is a long way to come to satisfy simple curiosity, especially when the last 20 is over bad roads. So why don't you tell me the truth, Edgecombe? I satisfied yours, so now you satisfy mine. Well, I could say I had a urinary infection, and John Coffey put his hands on me and healed it. The man who raped and murdered those two little girls did that. So I wondered about him. Of course, anyone would. I even wondered if maybe Homer Cribbis and Deputy Rob McGee didn't maybe collar the wrong man. In spite of all the evidence against him, I wonder that. Because a man who has a power like that in his hands, you don't usually think of him as the kind of man who rapes and murders children. No, maybe that wouldn't do. There are two things I wondered about, I said. The first is if he had ever did anything like that before. Hammersmith turned to me, his eyes suddenly sharp and bright with interest, and I saw he was a smart fellow, maybe even a brilliant fellow in a quiet way. Why? He asked. What do you know, Edgecombe? What has he said? Nothing. But a man who does this sort of thing once has usually done it before. They get a taste for it. Yes, he said, they do. They certainly do. And it occurred to me that it would be easy enough to follow his back trail and find out. A man his size and a Negro to boot can't be that hard to trace. You'd think so, but you'd be wrong, he said. In Coffey's case, anyhow. I know. You tried? I did. It came up all but empty. There were a couple of railroad fellows who thought they saw him in the Knoxville yards 2 days before the Dederick girls were killed. No surprise there. He was just across the river from the Great Southern Tracks when they collared him. That's probably how he came down here from Tennessee. I got a letter from a man who said he'd hired a big, bald black man to shift crates for him in the early spring of this year. This was in Kentucky. I sent him a picture of Coffey, and he said that was the man. But other than that, Hammersmith shrugged and shook his head. Doesn't that strike you as a little odd? Strike me as a lot odd, Mr. Edgecombe. It's like he dropped out of the sky. And he's no help. He can't remember last week once this week comes. No, he can't, I said. How do you explain it? We're in a depression, he said. That's how I explain it. People all over the roads. The Okies want to pick peaches in California. The poor whites from up in the breaks want to build cars in Detroit. The black folks from Mississippi want to go up to New England and work in the shoe factories or the textile mills. Everyone, black as well as white, thinks it's going to be better over the next jump of land. It's the American damn way. Even a giant like Coffey doesn't get noticed everywhere he goes. Until, that is, he decides to kill a couple of little girls. Little white girls. Do you believe that? I asked. He gave me a bland look from his too thin face. Sometimes I do, he said. His wife leaned out the kitchen window like an engineer from the cab of a locomotive and called, Kids, cookies are ready. She turned to me. Would you like an oatmeal raisin cookie, Mr. Edgecombe? I'm sure they're delicious, ma'am, but I'll take a pass this time. All right, she said, and drew her head back inside. Have you seen the scars on him? Hammersmith asked abruptly. He was still watching his kids who couldn't quite bring themselves to abandon the pleasures of the swing, not even for oatmeal raisin cookies. Yes, but I was surprised he had. He saw my reaction and laughed. The defense attorney's one big victory was getting Coffey to take off his shirt and show those scars to the jury. The prosecutor, George Peterson, objected like hell, but the judge allowed it. Old George could have saved his breath. Juries around these parts don't buy all that psychology crap about how people who've been mistreated just can't help themselves. They believe people can help themselves. It's a point of view I have a lot of sympathy for, but those scars are pretty ghastly just the same. Notice anything about him, Mr. Edgecombe? I had seen the man naked in the shower, and I'd noticed all right. I knew just what he was talking about. They're all broken up, latticed almost. You know what that means? Somebody whooped the living hell out of him when he was a kid, I said, before he grew. But they didn't manage to whoop the devil out of him, did they, Edgecombe? Should have spared the rod and just drowned him in the river like a stray kitten, don't you think? I suppose it would have been polite to simply agree and get out of there, but I couldn't. I'd seen him, and I'd felt him as well. Felt the touch of his hands. He's strange, I said, but it doesn't seem to be any real violence in him. I know how he was found, and it's hard to jibe that with what I see day in and day out on the block. I know violent men, Mr. Hammersmith. It was Wharton I was thinking about, of course. Wharton strangling Dean Stanton with his wrist chain and bellowing, "Woo-wee, boys, ain't this a party now?" He was looking at me closely now and smiling a little. Incredulous smile that I didn't dare care for very much. "You didn't come up here to get an idea about whether or not he might have killed some other little girl somewhere else," he said. "You came up here to see if I think he did it at all. That's it, isn't it? Fess up, Edgecombe." I swallowed the last of my cold drink, put the bottle down on the little table and said, "Well, do you?" "Kids," he called down the hill, leaning forward a little in his chair to do it. "Y'all come up here now and get your cookies." Then he leaned back in his chair again and looked at me. That little smile, the one I didn't much care for, had reappeared. "Tell you something," he said. "You want to listen close too, because this might just be something you need to know." "I'm listening." "We has a dog named Sir Galahad," he said, and cocked his thumb at the doghouse. "A good dog. No particular breed, but gentle, calm, ready to lick your hand or fetch a stick. There are plenty of mongrel dogs like him, wouldn't you say?" I shrugged, nodded. "In many ways, a good mongrel dog is like your Negro," he said. "You get to know it, and you often grow to love it. It is of no particular use, but you keep it around because you think it loves you. If you're lucky, Mr. Edgecombe, you never have to find out any different. Cynthia and I, we were not so lucky." He sighed, a long and somehow skeletal sound, like the wind rummaging through fallen leaves. He pointed toward the doghouse again, and I wondered how I had missed the general air of abandonment earlier, or the fact that many of the turds had grown whitish and powdery at the tops. "I used to clean up after him," Hammersmith said, "and keep the roof of his house repaired against the rain. And that way also Sir Galahad was like your southern Negro, who will not do those things for himself. Now I don't touch it. I haven't been near that since the accident, if you can call it an accident. I went over there with my rifle and shot him, but I haven't been over there since. I can't bring myself to. I suppose I will in time. I'll clean up his messes and tear down his house." Here came the kids, and all at once I didn't want them to come. All at once, that was the last thing on earth I wanted. The little girl was all right, but the boy... They pounded up the steps, looked at me, giggled, then went on toward the kitchen door. "Caleb," Hammersmith said, "come here just for a second." The little girl, surely his twin, they had to be of an age, went on into the kitchen. The little boy came to his father, looking down at his feet. He knew he was ugly. He was only 4, I guess, but 4 is old enough to know that you're ugly. His father put 2 fingers under the boy's chin and tried to raise his face. At first, the boy resisted, but when his father said, "Please, son," in tones of sweetness and calmness and love, he did as he was asked. A huge circular scar ran out of his hair, down his forehead, through one dead and indifferently cocked eye, and to the corner of his mouth, which had been disfigured into the knowing leer of a gambler or perhaps a whoremaster. One cheek was smooth and pretty, the other was bunched up like the stump of a tree. I guess there had been a hole in it, but that at least had healed. "He has the one eye," Hammersmith said, caressing the boy's bunched cheek with a lover's kind fingers. "I suppose he's lucky not to be blind." We get down on our knees and thank God for that much at least, eh, Caleb? Yes, sir, the boy said shyly. The boy who will be beaten mercilessly on the play yard by laughing, jeering bullies for all his miserable years of education. The boy who would never be asked to play spin the bottle or post office, and probably never sleep with a woman not bought and paid for once he was grown to manhood's times and needs. The boy who would always stand outside the warm and lighted circle of his peers. The boy who would look at himself in his mirror for the next 50 or 60 or 70 years of life and think, ugly, ugly, ugly. Go on in and get your cookies, his father said, and kissed his son's sneering mouth. Yes, sir, Caleb said, and dashed inside. Hammersmith took a handkerchief from his back pocket and wiped his eyes with it. They were dry, but I suppose he got used to them being wet. The dog was here when they were born, he said. I brought him into the house to smell them when Cynthia brought them home from the hospital, and Sir Galahad licked their hands, their little hands. He nodded as if confirming this to himself. He played with them, used to lick Arden's face until she giggled. Caleb used to pull his ears, and when he was first learning to walk, he'd sometimes go around the yard holding Galahad's tail. The dog never so much as growled at him, either of them. Now the tears were coming. He wiped at them automatically, as a man does when he's had lots of practice. There was no reason, he said. Caleb didn't hurt him, yell at him, anything. I know, I was there. If I hadn't have been, the boy would almost certainly have been killed. What happened, Mr. Edgecombe, was nothing. The boy just got his face set the right way in front of the dog face, and it came into Sir Galahad's mind, whatever serves a dog for a mind, to lunge and bite, to kill if he could. The boy was there in front of him, and the dog bit. And that's what happened with Coffey. He was there, he saw them on the porch, he took them, he raped them, he killed them. You say there should be some hint that he did something like that, something like it before, and I know what you mean. But maybe he didn't do it before. My dog never bit before, just that once. Maybe if Coffey was let go, he'd never do it again. Maybe my dog never would have bit again, but I didn't concern myself with that, I went out with my rifle and grabbed his collar and blew his head off. He was breathing hard. I was enlightened as the next man, Mr. Edgecombe. Went to college in Bowling Green, took history as well as journalism, some philosophy too. I like to think of myself as enlightened. I don't suppose folks up north would, but I like to think of myself as enlightened. I'd not bring slavery back for all the tea in China. I think we have to be humane and generous in our efforts to solve the race problem. We have to remember that your Negro will bite if he gets the chance. Just like a mongrel dog will bite if he gets the chance, and it crosses my mind to do so. Crosses his mind to do so. You want to know if he did it? Your weepy Coffey with the scars all over him? I nodded. Oh, yes, Hammersmith said. He did it. Don't you doubt it, and don't you turn your back on him. You might get away with it once, or 100 times, even 1,000. But in the end, he raised his hand before my eyes and snapped the fingers together rapidly against the thumb, turning the hand into a biting mouth. You understand? I nodded again. He raped them, he killed them, and afterward he was sorry. Those little girls stayed raped, those little girls stayed dead. But you'll fix him, won't you, Edgecombe? In a few weeks, you'll fix him so he never does anything like that again. He got up, went to the porch rail, and looked vaguely at the doghouse, standing at the center of his beaten patch in the middle of those aging turds. Perhaps you'll excuse me, he said. Since I don't have to spend the afternoon in court, I thought I might visit with my family for a little bit. A man's children are only young once. You go ahead, I said. My lips felt numb and distant. And thank you for your time. Don't mention it, he said. I drove directly from Hammersmith's house to the prison. It was a long drive, and this time I wasn't able to shorten it by singing songs. It felt like all the songs had gone out of me, at least for a while. I kept seeing that poor little boy's disfigured face and Hammersmith's hands, the fingers going up and down against the thumb at a biting motion. End of chapter 4. Green Mile, Part 3, Coffey's Hands, Chapter 5. Wild Bill Wharton took his first trip down to the restraint room the very next day. He spent the morning and afternoon being as quiet as good Marysville land, a state we soon discovered was not natural to him and meant trouble. Then, around 7:30 that evening, Harry felt something warm splash on the cuffs of his uniform pants he had put on clean just that day. It was piss. William Wharton was standing at his cell, showing his darkening teeth in a wide grin, and pissing all over Harry Tilwigger's pants and shoes. That dirty son of a bitch must have been saving it up all day, Harry said later, still disgusted and outraged. Well, that was it. It was time to show William Wharton who ran the show on E-Block. Harry got Brutal and me, and I alerted Dean and Percy, who were also on. We had 3 prisoners by then, remember. We were into what we called full coverage, with my group on from 7 in the evening to 3 in the morning, when trouble was most apt to break out, and 2 other crews covering the rest of the day. Those other crews consisted mostly of floaters, with Bill Dodge usually in charge. It wasn't a bad way to run things all in all, and I felt that once I could shift Percy over to days, life would be even better. I never got around to that, however. I sometimes wonder if it would have changed things, if I had. Anyway, there was a big water main in the storage room, on the side away from old Sparky, and Dean and Percy hooked up a length of canvas fire hose to it. Then, they stood by the valve that would open it if needed. Brutal and I hurried down to Wharton's cell, where Wharton still stood, still grinning and still with his tool hanging out of his pants. I had liberated the straitjacket from the restraint room and tossed it on the shelf in my office last thing before going home the night before, thinking we might be needing it for our new problem child. Now I had it in one hand, my index finger hooked under one of the canvas straps. Harry came behind us, hauling the nozzle of the fire hose, which ran back through my office, down the storage room steps, and to the drum where Dean and Percy were paying it out as fast as they could. "Hey, y'all like that?" Wild Bill asked. He was laughing like a kid at a carnival, laughing so hard he could barely talk. Big tears went rolling down his cheeks. "You come on as fast, I guess you must have. I currently cooking some turds to go with it. Nice soft ones. I have them out for y'all tomorrow." He saw that I was unlocking his cell door and his eyes narrowed. He saw that Brutal was holding his revolver in one hand and his nightstick in the other, and he narrowed even more. "You can come in here on your legs, but you go out on your backs. The kid is going to guarantee you that," he told us. His eyes shifted back to me. "If you think you're going to put that nut coat on me, you got another thing coming, old hoss." "You're not the one who says go or jump back around here," I told him. "You should know that, but I guess you're too dumb to pick it up without a little teaching." I finished unlocking the door and ran it back on its track. Wharton retreated to the bunk, his cock still hanging out of his pants, put his hands out to me, palms up, then beckoned with his fingers. "Come on, you ugly motherfucker," he said. "They be schooling all right, but this old boy is well set up to be the teacher." He shifted his gaze and his dark tooth grinned to Brutal. "Come on, big fella, you first. This time you can't sneak up behind me. Put down that gun. You ain't gonna shoot it anyway, not you. And we'll go man to man, see who's the better fella." Brutal stepped into the cell, but not toward Wharton. He moved to the left once he was through the door, and Wharton's narrow eyes widened as he saw the fire hose pointed at him. "No, you don't," he said. "Oh, no, you..." "Dean," I yelled, "turn it on, all the way." Wharton jumped forward, and Brutal hit him in a good smart lick, the kind of lick I'm sure Percy dreamed of, across his forehead, laying his baton right over Wharton's eyebrows. Wharton, who seemed to think we'd never even seen trouble until we'd seen him, went to his knees, his eyes open but blind. Then the water came. Harry staggered back a step under his power, and then, holding steady, the nozzle firm in his hands, pointed like a gun. The stream caught Wild Bill Wharton square in the middle of his chest, spun him halfway around, and drove him back under his bunk. Down the hall, Delacour was jumping from foot to foot, cackling shrilly and cursing at John Coffey, demanding that Coffey tell him what was going on, who was winning, and how that Gromfol new boy like that Chinese water treatment. John said nothing, just stood there quietly in his 2 short pants and his prison slippers. Only had one quick glance at him, but that was enough to observe his same old expression, both sad and serene. It was as if he'd seen the whole thing before, not just once or twice, but 1,000 times. "Kill the water," Brutal shouted back over his shoulder, then raced forward into the cell. He sank his hands into the semi-conscious Wharton's armpits and dragged him out from under the bunk. Wharton was coughing and making a glub-glub sound. Blood was dribbling into his dazed eyes from above his brows, where Brutal's stick had popped the skin open in a line. We had the straitjacket business down to a science, did Brutal howl at me. We practiced it like a couple of vaudeville hoofers working up a new dance routine. Every now and then, that practice paid off. Now, for instance, Brutal sat Wharton up and held out his arms toward me the way a kid might hold out the arms of a Raggedy Ann doll. Awareness was just starting to seep back into Wharton's eyes, the knowledge that if he didn't start fighting right away, it was going to be too late. But the lines were still down between his brain and his muscles, and before he could repair them, I'd rammed the sleeves of the coat up his arms, and Brutal was doing the buckles off the back. While he took care of that, I grabbed the cuff straps, pulled Wharton's arms around his sides, and linked his wrists together with another canvas strap. He ended up looking like he was hugging himself. God damn you, big dummy. How they doing with him? Delacour screamed. I heard Mr. Jingle squeaking as if he wanted to know too. Percy arrived, his shirt wet and sticking to him from his struggles with the water main, his face glowing with excitement. Dean came along behind him wearing a bracelet of purplish bruise around his throat and looking a lot less thrilled. Come on now, Wild Bill, I said, and yanked Wharton to his feet. Little walkie-walkie. Don't you call me that, Wharton screamed shrilly. And I think that for the first time we were seeing real feelings and not just a clever animal's camouflage spots. Wild Bill Hickok wasn't no range rider. He never fought him no bear with a bow knife either. He was just another bushwhacking John Law. Dumb son of a bitch sat with his back to the door and got killed by a drunk. Oh, my suds and body, a history lesson, Brutal exclaimed, and shoved Wharton out of his cell. A fella just never knows what he's going to get when he clocks in here. Only it's apt to be nice. But with so many nice people like you around, I guess that kind of stands to reason, don't it? And you know what? Pretty soon you'll be history yourself, Wild Bill. Meantime, you get to go down to the hall. We got a room for you, kind of a cooling off room. Wharton gave a furious, inarticulate scream and threw himself at Brutal, even though he was snugly buckled into the coat now and his arms were wrapped behind him. Percy made the draw his baton, the Wetmore solution for all of life's problems, and Dean put a hand on his wrist. Percy gave him a puzzled, half-indignant look, as if to say that after what Wharton had done to Dean should be the last person in the world to want to hold him back. Brutal pushed Wharton backward. I caught him and pushed him to Harry, and Harry propelled him down the Green Mile, past the gleeful Delacour and the impassive Coffey. Wharton ran to keep from falling on his face, spitting curses the whole way, spitting them the way a welder's torch spits sparks. We banged him into the last cell on the right, while Dean, Harry, and Percy, who for once wasn't complaining about being unfairly overworked, yanked all the crap out of the restraint room. While they did that, I had a brief conversation with Wharton. You think you're tough, I said. And maybe you are, Sonny, but in here, tough don't matter. Your stampeding days are over. If you take it easy on us, we'll take it easy on you. If you make it hard, you'll die in the end just the same, only we'll sharpen you like a pencil before you go. You're going to be so happy to see the end of me, Wharton said in a hoarse voice. He was struggling against a straitjacket, even though he must have known it would do no good, and his face was as red as a tomato. And until I'm gone, I'll make your lives miserable. He bared his teeth at me like an angry baboon. If that's all you want, to make our lives miserable, you can quit now, because you've already succeeded, Brutal said. But as far as your time on the mile goes, Wharton, we don't care if you spend all of it in the room with the soft walls. And you can wear that damn nut coat until your arms gangrene from lack of circulation and fall right off. He paused. No one much comes down here, you know. If you think anyone gives much of a shit what happens to you, one way or another, you best reconsider. The world in general, you're already one dead outlaw. Wharton was studying Brutal carefully, and the collar was fading out of his face. Let me out of it, he said in a placatory voice, a voice too sane and too reasonable to trust. I'll be good. Honest engine. Harry appeared in the cell doorway. The end of the corridor looked like a rummage sale, but we'd set things to rights with good speed once we got started. We had before, we knew the drill. All ready, Harry said. Brutal grabbed the bulge in the canvas where Wharton's right elbow was and yanked him to his feet. Come on, Wild Billy. And look on the good side. You're going to have at least 24 hours to remind yourself never to sit with your back to the door and never to hold on to no aces and eights. Let me out of it, Wharton said. He looked from Brutal to Harry to me, the red creeping back into his face. I'll be good. I tell you, I've learned my lesson. He suddenly collapsed. Half of him in the cell, half of him on a played out lino of Green Mile, kicking his feet and bucking his body. Holy Christ, he's pitching a fit, Percy whispered. Sure, my sister's the whore of Babylon, Brutal said. She danced the hoochie coochie for Moses on Saturday nights in a long white veil. He bent down and hooked a hand into one of Wharton's armpits. I got the other one. Wharton threshed between us like a hooked fish, carrying his jerking body. Listening to him grunt from one end and fart from the other was one of my life's less pleasant experiences. I looked up and met John Coffey's eyes for a second. They were bloodshot and his dark cheeks were wet. He had been crying again. I thought of Hammersmith making that biting gesture with his hand and shivered a little. Then I turned my attention back to Wharton. We threw him into the restraint room like it was cargo and watched him lie on the floor, bucking hard in the straitjacket next to the drain we had once checked for the mouse, which had started his E-Block life as Steamboat Willie. I don't much care if he swallows his tongue or something and dies, Dean said in his hoarse and raspy voice. But think of the paperwork, boys. It never ends. Never mind the paperwork. Think of the hearing, Harry said gloomily. We'd lose our damn jobs. End up pricking peas down Mississippi. You know what Mississippi is, don't you? It's the Indian word for asshole. He ain't going to die, and he ain't going to swallow his tongue either, Brutal said. When we open his door tomorrow, he's going to be just fine. Take my word for it. That's the way it was, too. The man we took back to his cell the next night at 9 was quiet, pallid, and seemingly chastened. He walked with his head down, made no effort to attack anyone when the straitjacket came off, and only stared listlessly at me when I told him it would go just the same the next time, and just had to ask himself how much time he wanted to spend pissing in his pants and eating baby food a spoonful at a time. I'll be good, boss. I learned my lesson, he whispered, in a humble little voice as we put him back in the cell. Brutal looked at me and winked. Late the next day, William Wharton, who was Billy the Kid to himself, and never that bushwhacking John Law Wild Bill Hickok, bought a moon pie from old Tutu. Wharton had been expressly forbidden any such commerce, but the afternoon crew was composed of floaters, as I think I have said, and the deal went down. Toot himself undoubtedly knew better, but to him, the snack wagon was always a case of the nickel is a nickel, a dime is a dime. I'd sing another chorus, but I don't have the time. That night, when Brutal ran his check around, Wharton was standing at the door of his cell. He waited until Brutal looked up at him, then slammed the heels of his hands into his bulgy cheeks and shot a thick and amazingly long stream of chocolate sludge in the Brutal's face. He had crammed the entire moon pie into his trap, held it there till it liquefied, and then used it like chewing tobacco. Wharton fell back on his bunk wearing a chocolate goatee, kicking his legs and screaming with laughter, and pointing to Brutal, who was wearing a lot more than a goatee. Little back Sambo, yes, sir, boss, yes, sir. How do you do? Wharton held his belly and howled. Gosh, if it had been only caca. I wish it had been. If I'd had me some of that. You are caca, Brutal growled. I hope you got your bags back, because you're going back down to your favorite toilet. Once again, Wharton was bundled into the straitjacket, and once again, we stowed him in the room with the soft walls. 2 days this time. Sometimes we would hear him raving in there. Sometimes we could hear him promising that he'd be good, that he'd come to his senses and be good. And sometimes we could hear him screaming that he needed a doctor, that he was dying. Mostly, though, he was silent. And he was silent when we took him out again, too, walking back to his cell with his head down and his eyes dull, not responding when Harry said, "Remember, it's up to you." He'd be all right for a while, and then he'd try something else. There was nothing he did that hadn't been tried before. Well, except for the thing with the moon pie, maybe. Even Brutal admitted that was pretty original. But his sheer persistence was scary. I was afraid that sooner or later, someone's attention might lapse, and it would be hell to pay. And the situation might continue for quite a while, because somewhere he had a lawyer who was beating the bushes, telling folks how wrong it would be to kill this fellow upon whose brow the dew of youth had not yet dried, and who was, incidentally, as white as old Jeff Davis. There was no sense complaining about it, because keeping Wharton out of the chair was his lawyer's job. Keeping him safely jugged was ours, and in the end, Old Sparkley will almost certainly have him, lawyer or no lawyer. End of chapter 5.